Hello, everyone. Hi, it's Harold, and welcome back. Um, we'll just give a moment for people to slowly come back. I'd just like to thank all of our presenters for really amazing contributions. Um, I thought just hopefully as people are formulating their questions, comments, clarifications, perhaps even your own provocations, um, I might sort of do a summary, partly for my own, and apologies to the presenters if it's not necessarily comprehensive. It's often what I've just kind of gleaned from listening and sort of working in reverse order, just responding to Barak's incredibly powerful presentation, reminded of the sort of power of silence, and what that leaves, but also, I think really framing this notion of accessibility and the politics, the dynamics of that, the experience of that, the hypocrisy of that, and also thinking about performance in relating to performing subjectivities and inhabiting space. So these were just key things, words that jumped out at me again. And then Lucie, I think it was really interesting to hear about this sort of the sort of challenges of programming in the kind of pandemic context, and really thinking about how, as an organization trying to support artists and bring in audiences, and thinking about the dynamics of the live space, public space, digital space, and again, the pragmatics and challenges and strategies around that. Joe was really struck by Joe's mode of presentation, really thinking through images and text and this audio commentary that sort of blends in biographical, personal, but also a kind of commentary again on processes, practice, structures, systems. And one word that really jumped out for me was infantilization of, I mean, Joe said many things, but that really struck me. And it came up again with Barak's, in Barak's presentation. Louise, I think, gave a really important reminder of this notion of an ecology of performance. One of the things that I was really excited by in the gathering of these people we have today is the cross conversations between performance is something that sits across various art delineations. So theatre, dance, circus, visual arts, and often organizational structures, I think, don't often allow or for a kind of cross conversation. But so thinking about ecologies and ecosystems, but also again, reminding ourselves of the kind of precarity of people who are negotiating those practices and having to deal with organizations, the economies, around that, and lack of sustainability. If we think about pay for artists and performers, and lack of sustainability, and the very useful reference of DAX as an organization that supports artists gaining rights and fees for their production of their work, presenting us with this manifesto. And then we started off with Jamila's really amazing, beautiful, poetic piece, really. And I was really thinking about poetics as a kind of mode, and a couple of things that really sort of struck me, the poetics of entanglement. So this kind of notion of kind of enmeshing that speaks to, I think, well, anyway, for me, where I feel maybe we might be at this point in terms of trying to give a commentary, but also how does one sit with that as a state of being entangled or enmeshed? And another thing that I felt that Jamila highlighted or that jumped out at me was this idea of risk. And yeah, thinking about whether that's in relation to the performer or subjectivities or the nature of the activity. Anyway, these are just a series of kind of reflections. I had, I mean, I don't know if, just to open it out to the panel a little bit, I mean, there were various kind of strands that came through, I think, across the presentations, some of them dealing, like I said, with the kind of more systemic structural issues that we might face, and thinking about like the conditions for performance. What are the politics of the conditions for performance now? And then I felt that some other presentations were kind of leaning more to really thinking about how you know, artists might be negotiating that through practice and manifestations of practice. It's not really a question, but I just wanted to give anybody a chance to kind of within the panel to kind of respond to any of that. You may want to respond to each other's provocations. So I'll just open the floor if anyone wants to come in.
I might just start actually by saying, well, I think there were so many things that people brought up that there's a lot really to think through. But something that I recall Jamila saying at the start as well was that she's in the process of reconfiguring. So actually to even have these conversations right now is difficult. And I feel that that is at a lot of the point where I myself feel as well, and I'm sure many people feel that, you know, we're in some ways have been talking about the pandemic as if it was in the past, but we're obviously still very much in it, and we're all still reconfiguring, you know, our position in relation to all of the precarity that I mentioned, as well as, you know, our own work, and having had in many cases an extended time for reflection, as well as, you know, a huge amount of stress, I think, in adapting in many different ways, as Lucie, you know, very well described in terms of being able to present work as well. So I feel that that is an interesting point in terms of everything that has been kind of laid out this morning, all the roads that have led us to this exact point. When thinking about what's at stake in performance, of course, you know, I'm thinking about the future as well, right? So yeah, for me, I think this is, even if we're not all quite ready or there with answers, I think it's a good point to reflect and review what that means, both on a personal level as well as, you know, the larger ecosystem that I was talking about.
Thanks, Louise. We have actually got loads of questions, so I'm going to just jump straight into maybe sort of sharing some of those, if that's okay. Hamad Nasser, apologies if I've not pronounced that correctly, has a question. They say, can the panelists and in particular, they're keen to hear from Barak, share examples of instances where the tensions between the ethics of providing access and the economics of doing so in an increasingly squeezed cultural sector have been handled well, or if there are no obvious examples of if you could suggest some principles we could aspire to. So examples and instances of the tensions between the ethics of access and the economics. Is that, hopefully that's a little bit clear. I'll give people a bit of time to kind of process that. But Barak, can you, I don't know if you feel you can come in on that.
Oh, okay. And I think particularly, you know, because the term is used access, and I use it very particularly within my framing. I am centering disability justice, understanding that it unfolds and is expansive. However, it's very particular for me. I'm also going to make the assumption and would welcome a follow-up, which is around economics, meaning about the money. And you know, I disrupt notions that access has to be valued in order for it to be attended to. That may be a principle I offer, because innovation is when disabled folk, when deaf folk, when they actually innovate because they cannot engage in access. So I look to and defer and center deaf and disabled folk to speak to how to address economy, because that is not about a value, it's about essentialism. It's about the fact that it's an essential aspect of our lives. And so then if we're going to move towards thinking about an economy and an ecology that is stressed and has been stressed with money, I defer to disability wisdom. And disability wisdom to say that it has always been the stress and attention. This is not a new thing. So it has always been, even when folks are resourced, access has not been part of the budget, has not been part of the thought, has been an afterthought. And so I would say that in principle, center access, and I speak about access particularly through, again, centering those deaf and disabled folk, and therefore, and their intersections, which could include social economic value as well. Center them, invest in them, acknowledge their labor, and then therefore you will find that it will become less tense for people to be concerned about the economics. What happens is that able-bodied folk oftentimes are the ones who are the gatekeepers, are the ones who are offering the budget, are the ones who are thinking for the deaf and disabled folk. And I would say that that's part of the tension in the issue, because the value then is not a value that is essential. It's a value that maybe feel like it's charitable, it's an add-on. And so therefore, this is why the importance of shifting the dynamic and the power dynamics of who is in leadership, who is supporting these budgets, who is crafting these budgets, who is funding the thing, so that it does not, access does not become the add-on, does not become logistical, does not become an economic value. It just becomes the thing itself. And so that's what I would offer. It must be centered to be the thing itself, not just the add-on logistical tick box, not just the aesthetic integrated moment, but the thing itself. And to think about that within the context of it as a cultural framework of care, not a framework of assistance. I think that that is, for me, the issue oftentimes in the economy, is that it's oftentimes thought of as an assisted thing, as opposed to an essential thing. So I'll offer that.
And I guess that might be seen to be centered in the kind of sort of ethics as opposed to the kind of, I don't know, the sort of economics or kind of political agendas that that are, you know, that often come with expectations. I mean, I don't know if anyone else wants to respond, because it was also opened out if anyone else wants to. The panel would like to come in. Lucie, yeah, please.
Yeah, just more respond is more like maybe sharing our experience. And I think, Barak, if you said it the necessity is not a choice, it's a necessity that the economics of it, the budget, it's part of our budgets, that accessibility, access is part where we budget when we prepare. So you can share it as a festival, and I don't think yet I cannot say we are presenting a best practice or anything, but we are trying and we are learning. And the one change we did this year has been across our life sites. We did a BSL interpreters, and it's an item on our on our budget, and it's there and it's going forward. We are negotiating the budgets actually in all these hundreds of items we have, but this is really important. We have ambassadors within the team. The team is being trained, and we are inviting people to talk to learn from. We are on the learning curve, but we know it's necessity have it that as a part of our sort of the economics of what we are doing, because that made a huge change to our audiences and going to different places, in Birmingham, and yeah, and incredible. The question is, we are asking how, is it be safe, how we can make it, for people really our shows accessible, but where does it belong? Where does it? Well, so this is all our learning, and I'm not saying we know the answers, because we need to work, as you said, with disabled societies and other other organizations in Birmingham who are the experts and who advise us, but there is the necessity to include that.
Thanks, Lucy. We have quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and get some of them out. This next one, Anonymous says, I feel like comments on the everyday performance was brought up, and I'm very passionate about that. Things like your morning routine, giving and showing love to others, doing things with love in our time. I'd love to know how Jamila, Joe, and Barak opinion on that and how it might line up with their practices. Maybe we can start with Jamila and then go to Joe and cycle back.
So can I ask that the questions, when they're being answered, don't disappear so quickly from the Q&A box? I like to kind of keep referring back to them. Maybe I guess I'm thinking about like about different publics or like different audiences for different performances, and something maybe that I am wondering at the moment is how much like disclosure is necessary or interesting to me or useful in relation to practice. Like how much of my practice as a performing artist is there to be like framed in that way, consciously visible to others. And this question, I feel like there are lots of things I could say. I think it's an interesting question, but I also feel a resistance to sharing in a way like the stuff of my everyday. Yeah. I'm totally going to pass on to anyone else. So.
Joe, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Harold. I think for me, if I'm kind of entirely honest, somehow everyday performance isn't something that really resonates with me. Whilst I hear the speaker is passionate, and not to diminish that in any way. I wonder if there's, I wonder if there's something, perhaps having trained as a performer, that delineates the idea of performance, you know, in my relationship to it. You know, what that is for me, or what it means for me. And that's not to say I don't think it only operates in a single environment, but that's what's coming up for me as I hear that question. Well, what is my relationship to that word and to that notion of performance? So that is there on one hand. But the other hand, I guess, is thinking more broadly. I think, Harold, you were reflecting back something that Barak had said around, or how you heard it around performing subjectivities. So I guess I would connect some of that question to, you know, how do we, you know, perform in the everyday? And for example, I've been in some really interesting meetings recently with Harold and some other artists, and a colleague of ours, Jack Tan, who does really exciting work around law and ceramics, and you know, I guess a notion of performing law, or how art is performs, and him offering really interesting thoughts about what happens when, you know, we start to perform being in a board meeting, you know, or how our environment, I guess our everyday, starts to really choreograph us, maybe I might say, from my perspective. So that's also a curiosity that comes up for me with that question.
Barak, would you want to, respond to that? It was also directed towards you as well.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the question. Yes, I engage in the everyday. I think of it because I'm oftentimes, for example, I would say this, the intervention I offered in relation to East Side projects, part of that was about getting there, because I wanted to make apparent the fact that it is always a struggle in the act of it. So, and I'm not invested again in trying to make this a politicized thing. I'm just trying to say this is a thing. Certain folks may have challenges even trying to get there. And then there's the act of being in the space, right? And that is a relational aspect for those who are not just witnessing, but interpreters, the facilitators. I say interpreters mean those who are engaged in the act, perhaps, of offering the work. So yeah, I'm very invested in that, because I think that it has not been attended to, and that we've moved towards the artifice of a kind of performance by which then those who are trained and only have a certain technique, it filters out those other bodies. And I've moved through 25 plus years of moving through these filters till I just got to the point where I got exhausted and I could not do it anymore. So I bring myself, my full self, to the space. And I think I'll kind of end by saying, I think about, because one of the first things, my first practices was around theater. And I don't know if y'all know about the bump in the stage, which basically is like when the actor is like getting ready to go on stage, and they're, you know, they kind of are all loosening up, and then they pass a threshold, and it's like a bump, so they move into character. And I am over that bump, and I removed the bump, because I believe that in the natural aspect of work, I'm actually bringing myself in conversation with the artwork, in conversation with whether it's the theater or the dance, to bring myself to it and not into the bump. I say the bump in dance is oftentimes the fact in which the rigor of the technique, that about the flat feet becoming pointed in order to create the contours that an artist has desired. And I want to remove the contouring, the contour bump that occurs in dance, and welcome bodies to bring the full selves, and then work from that place. And there are others who have done that. So for me, this is that space too. So I want to feel like it permeates, this way of performance can permeate all aspects, and we can attend to all aspects.
you. Yeah, for me, so maybe I was just thinking about authenticity, maybe, like, I don't know, maybe that's a sort of this idea of the transition between the moment before the threshold of the bump as well. It's like, great metaphor. We have so many more questions and so little time now. Thank you everyone for your kind of various contributions. I'm sort of struggling to pick which one. I'll maybe just, forgive me, just maybe sort of select a few. I know people are addressing various specific points, but maybe I'll go to this question by Mark Leahy, which is also a bit of a kind of commentary. If we can leave it up for people to also have a read. Feeling conscious of making performance with awareness of many intersecting and interfolded factors of climate, carbon impact, along with access and inclusion, which are all connected in terms of systemic factors. Can I, as a maker, carry all of these at once, or work to make in a conscious way the foreground aspects of these and pushes back against those systems? Not sure exactly what question this is, but anyway, I think the person, Mark's sort of, I think I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, really thinking about this idea of holding these really intersecting things. So we're thinking about climate change, but also, accessibility, inclusion, maybe add diversity to that. These real lived things that also become diffused and mediated through political kind of agendas. And thinking about maybe as performers or as agents within organizations, thinking about how we carry these things, how we kind of negotiate some of these things. I know that's huge, but I'm wondering what are your ways into that, and maybe you have specific perspectives. Maybe I'm thinking Lucie, maybe if we start with you. I don't know whether you want to speak from an organizational sense or your own sense as kind of operating just even as individuals, which obviously are. Lucie, can I? Sorry to.
It's fine. While listening and reading the question, I think these are the questions we are asking ourselves, because we are also pushing, against, those how the factors that are around us in terms of the external, circumstances that you need to negotiate on everyday basis in terms of creating context for performance. They are huge. So I don't have answers. I can only reflect. These are the same questions I'm asking, and about how does it impact that context we are, creating for performance. And when it comes to the environment, the political, what is happening around the pandemic, we can't decide exactly what the context is gonna be. We are driven by what the government or the city council tells us, and that's how we created the last festival. We didn't know until the last day of opening what is gonna happen. Are we gonna be allowed? Is someone gonna come and close because people standing, and no one was giving us answers. So we do operate in a really complex territory. So I totally, empathize with, Mark, is asking, and this is what we are negotiating on every day. So all of it. So it's in conversations, how we can, look at this. So no answer from me, but I understand, empathize with that circumstances.
Sorry, go ahead. Yes. No, I agree with Lucie that these are obviously some of the most pressing questions of our times, and how we address those is majorly challenging, because I think as I was sort of outlining, is there's all these systemic and structural issues that we're all struggling to operate within. And for me, I think there's well, I suppose kind of my question at the end of, that the provocation, I guess, is like, how can we sustain ourselves to continue to answer these questions when, and I think this is an issue not only within the arts or within performance, but is a question for society, is how do we not feel overwhelmed by, the challenges that we're facing at the moment? And I think, it's really an important question of, how activist can we be? How political can we be? Where do we, get the capacity to sustain a level of engagement, to address all of the numerous factors that, need to be talked about and need to be addressed. And I think, yeah, it's resourcing, as Barak mentioned. It's, also about this becoming inherent in how we work and how we operate, that becomes not an add-on. None of these things become an add-on, but that they're actually, completely in line with whether it's you as an organization or whether you as an individual operating. It's every day we make decisions about the things that we choose to do, and each of those has an impact. So, we might not all necessarily get it right the first time, but I think it's important that there is a commitment to addressing these things. That's what I guess I would say.
Thanks, Louise. Jamila, I wonder if I could bring you in. I mean, just, I don't know how you respond to this idea of kind of carrying these kind of intersecting, interfolding factors. Is that even an analogy that resonates?
I mean, I think I'm feeling struck by this line in the question or comment, a sense of needing to keep an energy to perform and to make. And I wonder about like the why perform and why make. Like, is that the thing that needs the focus while carrying the weight of these things? Or actually do other things need the focus? And I'm thinking about like internal processes of justification for doing the things that we do. And I guess I'm feeling quite loudly like the kind of what Barak was saying, this essential, what is essential to whom? And how does that change then the daily weight of things, or like the daily navigation of things? And something maybe about like this weight as a something on top, and weight as not even weight, but I guess I'm thinking of like, yeah, something added to what one is carrying and being. And I'm feeling if I'm thinking about myself and how I try not to separate myself into parts that have different weights or different shapes. Like I feel myself as, or I seek to feel myself as I don't know, a situation, a being, not it's like, and what do I want to say? I don't know, I guess I'm feeling like, the carrying a lot of things all at once, the being a lot of things all at once is kind of like can I say, like, maybe it's like part of a paradox of being, like a single entity, which is also multiple entities, which is always in relation and always in context. And as ever, sorry, slightly rambling range of things and no clear point, but I think that's what's coming up for me now.
I think it's exactly, I mean, these are sort of like, fundamental, almost existential questions, I think. I mean, in a way, I kind of felt maybe it's sort of framed as like this idea of like, almost like a kind of burden that we're sort of carrying, which I think, these challenges, societal, environmental, cultural challenges, but it's also struck me potentially there are also sort of opportunities within that. I mean, I want to bring in Joe and Barak just to respond to this. It's because we're sort of trying to kind of close and round things up a little bit, but yeah. Joe, should we, do you want to respond? And then...
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm struck by in what's being shared is where Barak began of a need to process. And I think that's what I'm kind of sitting with from today, just the incredible fullness of what we've all shared with each other. And for me, I think that notion of weight, I can, maybe I might say fullness, maybe. And I think grief for me as well. I think that's just a very strong feeling from this time. There's so much grief in so many ways. And so I think in relation to that question, I guess would name it as a need for processing. I think I was very struck where Jamila began of, I'm not ready to speak about this, or it was something like it was a mistake to say yes or something, and yeah, just something, part of how that lands for me is the need to process, and I'm really grateful for what's been offered today and to kind of take that, but I'm aware of that need for space, and then just something Louise said. I mean, Louise, I always really value your energy, that you, the irrepressible energy that you have and seem to bring. And you were just saying something about commitment, and I just wonder, commitment to the self, to process. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I guess I also just want to say thank you all. And if we can, because I imagine there are questions that are still there, I would love them, and perhaps we can find other ways to respond. I'm mindful in the particular this moment of thinking about burden, because I think oftentimes when we think about intersecting identities, I'm reminded of a curator when I was in a space where I was offered a fellowship, and the curator said to me, well, how can you be dealing with all those things as if it was the burden? And I was like, well, that's just how I am. So I resist the notion of this burdening. And that, as Jamila has offered, it's the way of being. And so I want to note that, and how we discern what we attend to, right? And self-determine that is one thing, but we must recognize that there's a hierarchy when we don't. That is societal hierarchy that we still engage in when we don't make decisions. When, for example, me talking about centering disability justice, is that I'm centering that in this moment because it had not felt centered. It's been decentered. So I'm mindful of thinking about that. I also want to bring up, because these things are just shown up and people have asked a question around access, and I want to refuse again the notion that it has to be about get the ramp, get the thing. There's so much more. I want to bring up Mia Mingus, MIA-MINGUS, access intimacy, which speaks about the ways of being in relationship to someone else, not to the thing, someone else, to understand how access shows up and to attend to it. So I'm bringing up Mia Mingus, who is an amazing disability activist, among other things, who's based, currently I think is still based in the Bay Area, and yeah, San Francisco Bay Area. I'm also thinking about Liz Lehrman, who is also Liz Lehrman's book, Hiking the Horizontal. I think this is a thing I'm thinking about, because hiking the horizontal is also about this thing about we're trying to carry all these things. What happens, we begin to hike the horizontal, we begin to dismantle the hierarchy. What happens in that moment, though, of shifting that, people are going to feel a certain way. We're going to feel a certain way. We're in this space when we are trying to attend to multiple things, the fullness of oneself, coming into space, being part of performance. Something shifts. When I talk about centering access, folks get concerned about how they get attended to. I kid you not. So I'm curious, if people have engaged with hiking the horizontal, that might be something that begins to also address this matter. So I just wanted to offer those resources, yeah, and share that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I mean, again, I'd like to thank all the panelists really for, yeah, your presentations, provocations, incredibly rich. I mean, hopefully this being recorded as a resource will give people an opportunity to kind of revisit that and unpack further what was said. And hopefully we can, I know there were many more questions and comments, and hopefully we can share some of those. We'll try and capture those and share those and disseminate those. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. I definitely got to thank Olivia and Rachel, our amazing BSL interpreters, for their incredibly hard work in supporting this session. And a big thanks to the East Side team, so Amelia, Jazz, Dinosaur, Gavin and Ruth, as ever, Candice and Yaz, who I've been working with very closely on the Loop exhibition. And again, huge thanks to Lucie and DanceXchange for supporting us in staging the exhibition and this event today. Thank you very much. It's been already, it's, you know, halfway through Saturday and already there's so much food for thought. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully see you soon in some guise somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Harold, and the team.
Thank you.
Thank you.